I work on infrastructure policy related to building and then long-term planning as it relates to water, power, and waste. So, oh, thank you. Apparently I can do this. Great. So I just want to overview kind of where our office stands. The mayor has made a number of commitments, as Enrique has mentioned. Before we took office, we met a 76.4 diversion rate. Thanks to Sanitation, that's fantastic. Recycle launched, and then we're here-ish now. So earlier this month, the mayor talked about commitments to a zero-waste city hall and department zero-waste planning, so that's us leading by example. But the big thing that we're trying to figure out now is, yes, we achieved a 76 diversion rate. This was before the Green Sword policy came into effect. This is before we were starting to do any sort of policy related to the commercial and multifamily sector. And we recognize that our goals, trying to get to 95% diversion rate and 100% diversion rate, is going to take the city as a whole on this. So separately, we're looking at construction demolition. That's not going to be talked about here. And a lot of what we're trying to figure out is and organics is not going to be talked about here. There's other efforts going on to that. So when we talk about recycling, we're really trying to figure out what's in those blue bins, what's in the black bins that can be moved over, what do we need to take out of the waste stream, and where do we want to go from there. We want to give credit to our recycle haulers. They're going to help us get 100 million tons of waste out of our landfills. So we recognize that anything that we decide to do with our blue bins immediately impacts everyone else as well. We set it up so that anything that we accept, they have to accept, and we recognize that our financial burden is also affecting the other private industries as well. So everyone knows this, but one of the things that we focus with the mayor on right now is the fact that approximately 35% of everything we're collecting is contamination. So that rate is pretty concerning for our office. Largely because of the 2 truck trips that are taking. We're collecting it once in a blue bin, moving it over to a MRF where it's getting sorted out, and then it's then getting trucked again to a landfill somewhere else. That's a lot of emissions that we don't want to have to deal with, that we want to see what we can reduce out. Otherwise, area that we're talking a lot about, or there seems to be a lot of conversation around, is related to plastics. It's honestly not a huge amount of our residential collection, and we recognize that. But because there's contamination, these don't have a market. It's causing an issue with the ability to really create a better product on the other side. So we want to see how we can ease that contamination and create a better product to sell. Enrique went over this, so obviously this is where we are today. Our exports are dropping. We're having trouble finding other areas. A lot of other cities that we look at are having issues as well. We've seen people cancel programs. We've seen people remove stuff from Blue Bin. We've seen a lot of different changes. And so we're in the discussion right now in the throes in this crisis-opportunity of what will work for Los Angeles. So policy options that the mayor is considering. Well, this is everything that's going on already on the international level, federal, state, and county. And I know my council partners will talk about existing motions and what's being discussed here locally as well. So we recognize that even though the city has a lot of impact, we want to make sure it fits into everything else that's being discussed. A lot of the federal, it's all in discussion. We don't expect anything to move probably until after the election, frankly, unless someone gets religion on recycling. The state, it'll be interesting to see if the ballot measure makes it. So there's a big ballot measure that's coming on for the fall that would put a tax on single-use plastic products. There are also a couple legislative items that was 2-year bills, but we're running out of time on that. So we're watching those, but no guarantee that that's going to be the solution. And then, fortunately, I know this might be brought up by our UCLA partners in the county that's here. We are trying to coordinate a lot with the county. Recognize that the single-use plastic straw ban, when that came in, there were some differences depending on where you were in the county. We want to make it easy when we talk about either removing items from circulation or changing material requirements, that it makes it easy so that you don't kind of create unnecessary competition, so that if you just want to go across the border to Carson or somewhere else to have a better opportunity because there's less restrictions, essentially. So just here are the policy areas that we're considering. We've already are working towards a single-use plastic phase-out legislation. This is with our county partners. This is with the city council. But when we're doing that, we want to make sure that we're not moving to items that are just as environmentally impactful. So a lot of the research that the mayor wants to see is what is the energy intensity of other recyclable items? What is actually compostable? What are those kind of impacts, so that if we say, okay, don't use your plastic water bottle, is someone just going to use an aluminum one that is actually more harmful somewhere else? So when we create this legislation, that's our thought on that, is not having kind of pushing the plastic bag down the road, so to speak, so we end up with thicker plastic bags. Let's try to make sure that we're thinking about it in a way that when we remove something, it's because it actually will benefit from an environmental perspective. What do we need to take out of our blue bin that frankly doesn't have a market? So we recognize that mixed plastics is falling. Do we just, instead of a ban, do we want to just consider not calling it recyclable anymore? Call it what it is. Call it trash, and let consumers recognize that if we take it out of the blue bin, they're seeing that it actually is going to landfill, less the wish cycling, so to speak. Contamination enforcement is a big item. Those three top items are probably going to have to come together. You can't necessarily remove something or ban something or say it's no longer recyclable without any sort of education. And that's going to come with contamination enforcement as well. So if it's going out and saying, hey, this actually isn't recyclable as you think it is, or if you throw something in there with water, it doesn't matter your good intentions, you've just basically ruined a load of paper. So what's needed for there? All of those, the last one especially comes with costs. So what can we do around marketing, around engagement on that, and what kind of workforce development do we need, or what workforce do we need to bring into the Bureau of Sanitation in order to handle that? Those are kind of short-term areas that we're aiming to do. I'm aiming to do very quickly. And then we'll move from there. Long stream, do we need to go back to multi-stream recycling? The city started with 2 to 3 bins of yellow bins. Can we get a better product if we take out our paper from mixing everything else? And what would that be? What would that cost? Would we want to go to a bi-weekly collection for paper sometime, plastic another time, or aluminums and whatnot? We're looking at that. Do we want to try and figure out a pay-as-you-throw scheme? This is growing in a couple places around the world. Auckland has the current best model for this, that if I don't throw away as much, why do I have to pay the same as my neighbor who throws away more? So what can be done for that? How do you discourage someone then from just tossing all their trash in their neighbor's bin? So it's a long-term question. This is probably more feasible in the short term, but long term we can kind of figure that out. And then do we need to move some of the private sector into the public? So do we want to own our own MRF? Do we want to be able to control what we sort out and be able to run test pilots on that? Our Bureau of Street Services, Streets LA, is considering or is testing a plastic water bottle-based slurry for streets. They have to get a lot of those water bottles not from the city of Los Angeles, probably not from anywhere in California, partly because of the deposit, but it's also not clean. And they can't necessarily go to the MRF and say, hey, I want just a ton of this to be able to test it. It's not really economical for the MRF to completely change how they are sorting everything. So if we own it, can we kind of create more test markets for that? It's not something that's going to be an easy or tomorrow purchase, but it's something that we definitely are considering. So this is kind of the broad strokes of where we're at now and kind of where we're going. From our office's perspective, we are also looking at circular economy as a pilot or market creation opportunity. This is some examples of circular economy from actually elsewhere in the world. This is an organization in the Netherlands that will go to factories and take all of the scrap material. So if you have a sheet of leather that punches out belts, they'll take that other sheet and store it. And they have school children come through. Anyone can come through and purchase that as an excess thing for anything they want to create. It takes a lot of space. Where could that be? Who would do that? How could we manage that? There's something similar for wood. Someone goes through and strips wood from, before anything is demoed, they'll take all of the reusable wood and they commit to sell it for below virgin price of wood. So how are they creating markets that actually makes it cheaper to use reused material? We know that virgin material still is cheaper for a lot of people. So why recycle or why use recycled material if it's going to cost you more and it's not clean when you can get the virgin stuff for cheaper and better? So how can we create that market so that it isn't cheaper and it's actually better to reuse? So that's where we're looking. So subsidies is one, cost of others, requirements related to recycled content in packaging or other types of material. So when we talk about material shifting, that's another area we're looking at. Do we need to require certain amounts of recycled content in areas? Will that be helpful? Will that not be helpful? Those are kind of things we want to hear back from industry on that. You know, if we're going to ban something, what's your automatic shift going to be, and is that better or worse? So this is kind of where we're at, what we're looking at. I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say today and conversations and questions, but that's what the mayor wants. So.